7 months. That is how long I sat in my own house and let her talk. I want you to hold that number for a second, because by the time I'm done, you're going to understand exactly what 7 months of silence costs a man, and exactly what it buys him. I was 64 years old, retired 18 months, living in a house I'd owned since 1989. My wife of 31 years had moved out 4 months prior. She took her reading glasses and her good coat, and the set of mixing bowls she'd had since before we were married. She left the house in both our names. She assumed that meant something. I want you to understand something about that dinner before I tell you anything else. The tablecloth was white. The steakhouse was her choice, and somewhere between the salad and the main course, a man named Tomas pulled out a chair and sat down across from me at my own table. He turned a college ring on his finger when he talked, a habit he probably wasn't aware of. He smiled at me the way men smile at furniture. Denise looked at me, she said in Polish, "Don't worry, he doesn't understand anything. That's where we're going. Let me back up. Welcome to Real Life Verdict. Get comfortable. The people in this story had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong." Drop a comment, hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed. My name is Raymond. I spent 37 years as a union electrician. Commercial installations, hospitals, schools, municipal buildings across 3 states. I retired 18 months ago with a pension, a paid-off truck, and a house that still had my handwriting on the permit applications from when I rewired the kitchen in 2004. I am not a complicated man to look at. High school diploma. Hands that don't look soft. I drove the same route to the same coffee shop every morning for 11 years. I showed up every other Saturday at the Habitat for Humanity site and ran conduit and pulled wire and taught the younger volunteers how to do it right. I carried a Motorola two-way radio from 1998 with electrical tape holding the battery door shut because the thing still worked, and I saw no reason to replace it. Denise worked reception at a medical office building when I met her. She was 22. I was 33. She thought I was steady. I thought she was enough. We were both operating on incomplete information. What she saw when she looked at me for 31 years was a man with a small world, and she wasn't entirely wrong. My world was organized. It had edges. I did not volunteer information that was not requested. I did not perform depth for people who hadn't asked about it. I went to work. I came home. In the evenings, after she'd gone to bed or gone to wherever she went, I sat in my chair and I read. She never asked what. Tomasz Kowalczyk was 41 years old, her direct supervisor at the medical supply distribution company where she'd been working accounts payable for 6 years. He had a degree from a university in Krakow. He drove an Audi. He had a habit of standing close to people in a way that was meant to establish something. I met him twice before the dinner. Both times he shook my hand and looked past my shoulder. Both times Denise watched him do it and said nothing. I thought he was a type, a man who needed a room to agree with him before he felt safe in it. I was correct. I just didn't yet know the full scope of what he'd decided about me. The first small thing I noticed, the thing I filed away without making a case out of, was the reading glasses. Denise wore them for anything close up. Phone, recipe card, pill bottle label. When she set her phone down on the counter or the coffee table, she put her glasses on top of it. Not beside it. On top of it. Like a lid. She'd never read anything on her phone without picking it up first. She didn't need the glasses at a distance. So the glasses on top of the phone wasn't a convenience. It was a signal. It said, "This is not for you." I noticed. I didn't say anything. A detail is just a detail until it has company. Early September. Her car was in a shop for a fuel pump. I drove downtown to pick her up at the end of her shift, pulled into the parking lot, and waited in the truck. She came out with Tomasz. They walked to his Audi and stood between the cars and talked. 4 minutes. I watched them from 80 feet away. I wasn't hidden. Tomasz glanced at the truck once. He said in Polish, "Your husband looks bored." I sat with that for a moment. I had understood every word. I want you to stay with me here, because this is the part where the floor started moving under my feet, even though I was sitting completely still. I didn't grip the steering wheel. I didn't do anything. I watched Denise laugh, watched her shift her weight toward him, watched the easy fluency of two people who have been speaking in a private frequency for longer than I'd realized. And I thought, he said that in front of me on purpose, because he calculated that I was furniture. Denise got in the truck. She said the traffic on 5th was bad. I said I'd take the back way. I did. I did not tell her what I'd heard. I had one thing to check first. Late September. I was running the dishwasher. She was in the living room on the phone. She laughed at something, and then she said in Polish, "He thinks I'm working late." I stood at the sink and listened to the dishwasher cycle. A single overheard conversation is an accident. 2 is a pattern. I am an electrician. I understand systems. I understand that when a wire carries current, it doesn't ask permission. It just flows to where the resistance is lowest. She had found her path of least resistance. She had decided I was the low-resistance end of the circuit. She was right that I asked few questions. She was wrong about why. I went to bed at my normal time. I did not sleep immediately. I ran the numbers in my head, not the emotional arithmetic, but the practical kind. What I knew. What I didn't know. What I didn't know. What I would need to know before I did anything at all. I decided I would do nothing yet. I had 37 years of watching men cut corners, and I knew the difference between a problem and a fully realized problem. This one wasn't finished yet. I set it down and let it keep happening. Mid-October. I was replacing a section of fence in the backyard on a Saturday afternoon. She was on the patio 15 feet from me with her phone. She had glanced at me when she came outside. Assessed. Decided. She said to the phone, "He never asks where I'm going." I drove a fence post into the ground. She went inside 10 minutes later. What she had done by this point was decide that proximity was the same as privacy. That standing in the same air as me was safe because she had already decided what I was. She was not hiding. She had written me off as a witness. That is a specific kind of mistake. It is the kind you cannot walk back once it has been made long enough. I had not yet decided what I was going to do. I was still watching, still counting. But I will tell you this. Something settled in me in that October backyard that I do not have a clean word for. It wasn't anger. It was more like alignment. Like when you pull a wire tight and it stops vibrating and just runs clean and straight. Something in me went quiet. I finished the fence. I came inside. She had made coffee. I thanked her. Early December. Grocery store parking lot. I was cutting across toward the entrance and I saw them 3 rows over, standing between 2 cars. Tomas had his hand on her waist. She leaned in. He said, "He won't say anything. He's too stupid." She did not correct him. "I want you to understand something about me. I do not act on feeling. I was not raised to, and 37 years of running electrical systems in buildings where your error can kill someone teaches you that clean execution requires clean thinking, and clean thinking requires distance from the feeling. You feel it, you note it, you set it down, then you work. I walked into the grocery store. I bought what I came for. I drove home. He had named what both of them believed. That was useful. I prefer to know exactly what I am dealing with. I had one thing neither of them had accounted for. I wasn't ready to use it yet. Late January, 4 a.m. I was awake in bed. The bathroom door was mostly closed but not latched. Sound carries in a ranch house. She said in Polish, "Maybe I should just leave, but the house is in my name too." There it was, the house. The asset she had been circling. She had been mapping what she was standing on, calculating the ground under her feet. She thought she knew what she had. I did not move. I lay there in the dark and let her finish the call. I heard her ease the bathroom door open, heard her cross the floor, get back into bed. 7 minutes later, her breathing changed. I stayed awake until it was light outside. This was the moment the thing became something else. The conversations until now had been about concealment, about managing a separate life, about keeping me in the dark. This conversation was about logistics. She had started planning, and the plan involved property she did not understand. She could not simply claim, "I knew the title. I knew whose name was on the mortgage payments. I knew where the paperwork was." I did not make a move yet, but I started drafting in my head. The way you draft a job before you pull a single foot of wire, sketch the load, plan the route, account for every junction. Now pay attention, because this is where the story asks something of you. If you've ever sat across from someone who looked you in the eye and told you exactly how small they thought you were, and you had to decide what to do with that, not in the moment, but over time, you know the particular kind of discipline that requires. A lot of you know exactly what I'm describing. Have you ever watched someone underestimate you so completely, you decided to let them? Drop that in the comments. I read them. And if you're not subscribed yet, do that now, because what happens in the next part is the reason I'm telling this story. Let's keep going. Late February. We were in the living room. Normal evening. I was in my recliner. She was on the couch. She told me she was pregnant. I asked if she was sure. She said yes. She did not say when. She did not say how. I said nothing else. She watched my face for something and apparently found what she expected. The face of a man absorbing bad news without the processing speed to know how bad. I know what she saw, because I know what I was doing. I was not absorbing bad news. I was confirming a calculation. She was carrying Tomas's child. I had understood that since October. The announcement wasn't information. It was a marker. It meant she had moved from planning to execution. I sat in my recliner and watched the rest of the news program, and she watched me watch it. 3 days later, she moved out. Said she needed space. Said she didn't expect me to understand. Said she was sorry. I thanked her for telling me. I meant it, but not the way she thought. 6 weeks after she moved out. Front porch, evening. I was sitting on the steps replacing the battery in my radio. The tape had dried out, and I needed to reseat it. She had come by to pick up some things. She was on her phone, pacing the driveway. She said in Polish, "The policy is for 150,000. If something happened, I'd be covered." I held the battery in my palm and did not move. She was talking about my life insurance policy. 30-year policy. $150,000 death benefit. Her name on it since the month we were married. She had mentioned it to Tomasz. She had said if something happened. I want you to hear me say that plainly, because I want you to understand what I was sitting with on those front porch steps. I am 64 years old. She is 53. Tomasz is 41. She is pregnant. She had just told the father of her child the value of my life insurance policy and said if something happened. Maybe it was an offhand remark. Maybe it was nothing more than a woman calculating her financial position. I am not a man who assumes the worst interpretation of an ambiguous statement, but I am also not a man who ignores it. I finished reseating the battery. I pressed the door shut. The tape held. She went inside to get her things, and I sat on those steps for a long time, and I thought about every single thing I still held that she didn't know I held. March 1st, I drove to the county clerk's office. The clerk was a young woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain. She looked at the quitclaim deed transfer form, and she asked me, "Are you sure about this?" I said yes. I took the forms home. I did not file them yet. I had 17 days to wait. There is something I have not told you yet. I have told you I understood every word. I have told you I've been following these conversations for 7 months. I've told you she thought the language was a private room. Now I'm going to tell you what she didn't know about the room. I learned Polish in 1993. I was 30 years old, running commercial electrical installations, and half my crew spoke limited English. Good men. Precise, patient, the kind of workers who triple-check their measurements. They spoke Polish on the job because it was faster. I started picking it up out of necessity. Words for conduit, for load, for the plans are wrong. Run it this way instead. By 1995, I could hold a conversation. By 1997, I was dreaming in it occasionally. I liked the structure of it. It had a logic that rewarded attention. I kept studying. Library books first, then cassette tapes, then CDs, then the apps. I read Polish news sites. I listened to Polish radio on the night drives. By the time Denise and I met Tomasz Kowalczyk for the first time at that company dinner in 2019, I had been functionally fluent in Polish for more than 20 years. She never asked what I did with my evenings. She never asked. There is no accent when I speak it. There is no hesitation. There are men who were born in Krakow who've spoken it for less of their lives than I have. I did not tell Denise because she did not ask, and because the thing you love about a private skill is exactly that. The privacy. It was mine. It was the part of the circuit she couldn't see, couldn't measure, couldn't map. She spoke to the father of her child in Polish for 7 months, in parking lots and grocery stores and my own driveway, within 20 feet of me. I understood every word. March 15th. 3 days before the dinner. Ken Showalter showed up at my door at 8 in the morning. He was wearing the same Carhartt jacket he'd worn on job sites for 20 years, cuffs bleached from wire handling. He didn't call first. He knocked. I opened the door. He looked at me for a moment. He said, "You're not telling me, and I'm not asking. Just let me know when you're clear." I let him in. We drove to the county clerk's office at 9, and he stood beside me while I signed the quitclaim deed, transferring my half of the house to my son. The clerk date stamped it. Ken witnessed it. My son's name went on the title of a house in a town he doesn't live in, and he did not yet know it. From there we drove to the bank. The joint account held $47,000, my pension payout, my severance, 30 years of consistent contribution, and her occasional deposits. I closed it. Walked out with a cashier's check made out to me. Ken held the check while I made one phone call. 3 weeks before that, I had already changed the beneficiary on the life insurance policy. $150,000. Denise's name removed. My daughter's name added. Filed, confirmed, done. By noon on March 15th, everything Denise believed she was standing on had been relocated. The dinner was in 3 days. I went home. I pressed my good shirt. I cleaned my boots. I sat in my chair that evening and I listened to Polish radio for an hour. I thought about a 22-year-old woman standing in a medical office lobby in 1992, deciding that the electrician was steady enough to build a life on. I thought about 31 years. I thought about the reading glasses on top of the phone, the fence post, the 4 a.m. bathroom conversation. I thought about what it costs to sit still for 7 months, and what it was about to buy. March 18th. Friday evening. The steakhouse she'd chosen. White tablecloth. She was already seated when I arrived. She had dressed up. I noticed that. She ordered a glass of wine. We talked about nothing. The weather, whether the road construction on the main road was ever going to finish. The ordinary vocabulary of two people who have already said everything. Halfway through the main course she looked past my shoulder, and her expression changed. Tomas pulled out a chair and sat down. She had invited him. She told me he was just stopping by. He shook my hand across the table. He held eye contact long enough to establish that he didn't feel the need to. He turned, his Krakow ring on his finger. He said something pleasant in English about the restaurant. He ordered a drink. Then he and Denise began to talk to each other in Polish. 40 seconds. He looked at me and said, "He looks like he's given up." She said, "Don't worry. He doesn't understand anything." I set my fork down. I wiped my mouth with the napkin. I looked at Denise for 3 seconds. She looked back at me with the patience of a woman who has already decided what she is looking at. I looked at Tomasz. He was smiling. I stood up. I put on my jacket. I looked at my wife of 31 years, and I said in Polish, clearly, without hesitation, without accent, "Rozumiem ka dejść doło, katare powiedzia te z ostatnich misji." I have understood every word you've said for the last 7 months. She did not move. Dom just teraz na nazwisko, naszego syna. Konto just zamknięte. Polisa została zmieniona. The house is in our son's name. The account is closed. The policy has been changed. I looked at her face. Nie masz nic, Nick. You have nothing. I looked at Tomas. I said in English, "She's your problem now." I walked out. The parking lot was cold. March in the Midwest means nothing about the calendar and everything about the wind off the flat ground. I found my truck where I'd left it. Third row, I'd parked under a light out of habit. 37 years of loading and unloading in the dark. I drove to Ken's house, parked in a driveway. He opened the garage door before I knocked. We sat in the garage for 2 hours. There was a space heater in the corner that ticked when it cycled. He handed me a beer at some point. We didn't say much. That was fine. Some things don't require narration. I thanked him when I left. I drove to a motel off the highway. Checked in for 3 nights under my own name. Turned off my phone and set it on the nightstand. The room smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and the heater ran too loud. I lay down on the bed with my boots still on and I looked at the ceiling. I had been married for 31 years. That is accurate. I had been seen for 31 years. That is not. There is a difference. Victor Polinsky showed up 2 days later. I hadn't called him. He'd heard through the Union grapevine the way news travels in those channels, fast without attribution. He drove his 1994 Buick LeSabre up to the motel parking lot, shop rag folded in the door pocket, and he knocked on the room door at 9 in the morning. I opened it. He said, "You need something moved, you call me. I'll bring the truck. You don't ask twice." I thought about the Polish electricians who taught me to say the plans are wrong and to run it this way instead. I thought about 30 years of studying a language in a chair while a woman slept in the next room and never once asked what I was doing. "Thank you, Victor," I said. He nodded. He went back to his car. He flipped down his sun visor. I could see the laminated photograph from where I stood, and then he backed out and drove away. I stood in the doorway of the motel room. The morning was cold and clear. Flat Midwestern light on the parking lot. A crow on the light pole made a sound and then made it again. 7 months. That is what it costs. That is what it buys. I went back inside and sat in the chair by the window, and I was quiet for a long time, and I found that the quiet was different now. Something had stopped vibrating. The wire was running clean. That was enough.